That is the question I will attempt to answer today. In modern days, dragons are believed to be fictional monsters. But if you go back in time, you will find that nearly everyone believed in and debatably fought against dragons. Indeed, even the Bible speaks of them as fact. First, one thing must be clarified. There is debate as to whether the word dragon in the older translations of the Bible should instead be translated jackal, as it is in the newer versions of the Bible. But I believe it is indeed dragon, as the main reasons for a translation as jackal seem to be due to the context, and otherwise it can be taken as dragon. So without further ado, I will dive into the Bible verses that I take as proof for the existence of dragons. The burden of the beasts of the south. Into the land of trouble and anguish, whence come the young and old lion, the viper and the fiery flying serpent. They will carry their riches upon the shoulders of young asses, and their treasures upon the bunches of camels, to a people that shall not profit them. Interestingly, the NIV translates fiery flying serpent as darting snake, despite the fact that most other translations agree with the King James Version, which is what this was. And it is a dragon. I mean, it's fiery, it flies, and it is a serpent. The common interpretation, however, is that this refers to a symbolic, venomous snake that can fly or glide. One obvious problem with this is, what about the word fiery? Does that simply mean that it is venomous? There is a species of gliding snake, and they are only mildly venomous, not harmful to humans. I can think of little better description of a dragon than a fiery flying serpent. Instead of crushing the Bible to fit into science and our current knowledge, we should instead look for the truth in what we know today, and then seek alternatives if it doesn't make any sense. Rejoice thou not, whole Philistia, because the rod of him who smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and out of his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. Again, Isaiah mentions a fiery flying serpent. He also talks about a cockatrice, and that is another type of dragon-like creature. Something like a winged snake with one pair of legs right in front of its wings, and sometimes with the head of a rooster. Again, the mainstream dismisses the cockatrice as a symbolic of death and chaos. And it shall bring forth thorns in the palaces thereof, and it shall be an habitation for dragons, and a court for ostriches. There also shall meet Zim and Im, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow, and the screech owl shall find for herself a dwelling there. Whoa, that is a lot. Not only are there dragons in these verses, but also satyrs, Zim and Im, and a few verses before this it mentions unicorns. Before I explain what I think this means, I will read another verse that I think ties into this one. But Zim shall lodge there, and their houses shall be full of Ohim. Ostriches shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there, and Im shall cry in their palaces. And the time thereof is ready to come, and the days thereof shall not be prolonged. The mainstream says that Zim and Im simply means desert beasts or ruin. However, it then goes on to tell us that Ohim are literal evil spirits. This seems almost contradictory, as in this verse Zim and Ohim are mentioned very closely, making it seem that if one is a spiritual entity, that the other is likely at least something beyond an analogy for desert beasts. I believe Zim and Im might refer to some kind of demonic or other unpleasant spiritual being. They also seem to be somehow related to satyrs. Interestingly, there are a handful of accounts of satyrs or satyr-like beings in recent years. Though whether or not these accounts are earnest or simply people trying to get some attention, I can't tell you, but I won't just dismiss them out of hand. Anyway, getting back to dragons. I won't share any more Bible verses of dragons yet, but I will share a recent account of something that can only be described as a dragon. I will tell this story directly from a newspaper article that talks about this. A winged monster resembling a huge alligator with an extremely elongated tail and an immense pair of wings was found on the desert between Whetstone and Huachuca Mountains last Sunday by two ranchers who were returning home from the Huachucas. The creature was evidently greatly exhausted by a long flight, and when discovered was able to fly but a short distance at a time. After the first shock of amazement had passed the two men, who were on horseback and armed with Winchester rifles, they regained sufficient courage to pursue the monster, and after an exciting chase of several miles, succeeded in getting near enough to open fire with their rifles and wound it. The creature then turned on the men, but owing to its exhausted condition, they were able to keep out of its way, and after a few well-directed shots, the monster partly rolled over and remained motionless. The men cautiously approached, their horses snorting with terror, and found that the creature was dead. They then proceeded to make an examination and found that it measured nearly 92 feet in length, and the greatest diameter was about 50 inches. The monster has only 2 feet, these being situated a short distance in front of where the wings were joined to the body. The head, as near as they could judge, was about 8 feet long, the jaws being thickly set with strong, sharp teeth. Its eyes were as large as a dinner plate and protruded about halfway from its head. They had some difficulty in measuring the wings, as they were partly folded under the body, but finally got one straightened out sufficiently to get a measurement of 78 feet, making the total length from tip to tip about 160 feet. The wings were composed of a thick, nearly transparent membrane, and were devoid of feathers or hair, as was the entire body. The skin of the body was comparatively smooth and easily penetrated by a bullet. The men cut off a small portion of the tip of one wing and took it home with them. Late last night, one of them arrived in the city for supplies and to make the necessary preparations to skin the creature, when the hide will be sent east for examination by the prominent scientists of today. The finder returned early this morning, accompanied by several prominent men who will endeavor to bring this strange creature to the city before it is mutilated. This is incredible. As recently as 1890, there were draconic creatures roaming the deserts of Arizona. Surely this could be fabricated, but these two ranchers supposedly brought back the tip of the thing's wing. Did these two men just dupe the entire town with some fake wing fragment? Also, why is there no further record of anything more with this creature? What of the prominent men who went back into the desert to retrieve it? Isn't it odd that everything goes silent after these prominent men went off into the desert with the ranchers? This is a theme you see in many recent accounts of fantastical creatures. One or more people find and often kill some kind of creature, and then the Smithsonian or some other shady group shows up and everything goes quiet. To me, this smells like a cover-up, but maybe these two ranchers really were just liars. There is another account of flying serpents, or I should say several accounts of the same flying serpents, in Libya, Egypt, and Arabia. The following is told by a 4th century Roman historian. Among Egyptian birds, the variety of which is countless, the ibis is sacred, harmless, and beloved for the reason that by carrying the eggs of serpents to its nestlings for food, it destroys and makes fewer of those destructive pests. These same birds meet winged armies of snakes which issue from the marches of Arabia, producing deadly poisons before they leave their own lands. Interestingly, this is not the only account of these same serpents who are attacked yearly by the ibis. What are these flying venomous snakes? Why would multiple historians talk about them if they weren't real? As I mentioned before, there is a type of snake that can glide, but does not live anywhere near Arabia, as they live in Indonesia and Sri Lanka. Also, their venom is not deadly. These are but two in a multitude of draconic encounters from 45 BC to the 1900s. Most times, with anything recent, suspiciously, the Smithsonian Institute swoops in and takes whatever it might be away, as they do with giant bones. All these stories I find to be rather compelling evidence, but ultimately the thing that decides my mind as to their existence, former or present, is the Bible. The Bible is without error, and I hate to dismiss anything in it by calling it just poetry. Even poetry has meaning. Now I'm going to switch into the slightly different topic of sea dragons and Leviathan. As I did with the dragons, I'm going to read some Bible verses, talk about them, and then talk about other encounters with sea dragons and other such creatures. The following is from the Geneva translation of the Bible. In that day the Lord with his sore and great and mighty sword shall visit Leviathan, that piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. In this verse we have both sea dragons and Leviathan being mentioned. What is Leviathan? Well, I'll explain that in a minute. Just hold on to the idea that Leviathan is a serpent. As for the sea dragons, well, you can't exactly argue that dragon should be translated jackal in this verse, which lends credence to the idea that other mentions of dragon is not jackal. I will wait to go deeper into sea dragons until I talk about the recent stories. Now, back to the Bible. This is the New King James Version, but really almost every translation is nearly the same. Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line that you lower? Can you put a reed through his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you leash him for your maidens? Will your companions make a banquet of him? Will they apportion him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him, remember the battle. Never do it again. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has preceded me that I should pay him? Everything under heaven is mine. I will not conceal his limbs, his mighty power, or his graceful proportions. Who can remove his outer coat? Who can open the doors of his face with his terrible teeth all around? His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another, they stick together and cannot be parted. His sneezings flash forth lightning, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. Strength dwells in his neck, and sorrow dances before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together. They are firm on him and cannot be moved. His heart is as hard as stone, even as hard as the lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of his crashings, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail. Nor does spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw. He laughs at the threat of javelins. His undersides are sharp like potsherds. He spreads pointed marks in the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think the deep had white hair. On earth there is nothing like him, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing. He is king over all the children of pride. What could this possibly be? Oh, I know, it's a crocodile. No? Really? Oh, a whale then? No? These are two legitimate beliefs held by multiple Bible scholars as to the identity of Leviathan. I'm going to explain why I think these interpretations are ridiculous, if you can't tell for yourself. First of all, why would God use a creature that many men have killed as an example of his strength? And I don't think anyone would be overwhelmed at the sight of a crocodile, or even a whale. Also, whales are fairly easy to pierce with spear, arrow, harpoon, or sword, not to mention they don't have scales. Whales don't have teeth. Crocodiles don't sneeze lightning and breathe fire, and neither do whales. Crocodiles don't make the deep to roil. I will waste no more time on these two theories and move on to two other theories that I find to be more credible, or at least one of them is. First is the theory that it is merely a symbol of death and chaos. Now, I know I said that this is more plausible than a whale, but really? You're going to tell me that this is not a real creature? It literally describes him being fought, his strength, and his appearance. I'm sorry, but there is no way. Now for the final and most plausible theory. Some people would say that this is a type of ocean-dwelling dinosaur that somehow survived after the flood. Again, this would be the most plausible theory, assuming that dinosaurs are real, if it weren't for a few things. First, this chapter seems to be talking about a specific creature, though it could be interpreted otherwise. Secondly, what about verse 21 when it says, "His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth"? I've never heard of a dinosaur that breathes fire, or sneezes lightning as it says in verse 18. And at that point, we're not talking about a dinosaur, we're talking about a dragon. Now that I've presented all the theories that I have heard, I'll present my own. Obviously, I can only speculate, but I would say this is either a type of sea dragon, monstrous and nearly undefeatable, or it is one-of-a-kind sea monster. The main basis for these two theories is simply the passage itself, as well as the passage in Isaiah that I read earlier. That clearly describes Leviathan as a serpent. The description is quite detailed, and in my mind leaves little room for doubt. Now, back to sea serpents. The ordinary ones. Well, there are several stories that I have heard about sea serpents, but I will not go into them right now. My belief is that sea serpents were very large, scaly serpents, basically the traditional idea of them. We have explored so little of the ocean that for all we know, sea serpents are common in some of the deeper places of the oceans. And now we shall dive into the final subject for today. Unicorns. Save me from the lion's mouth, and answer me in saving me from the horns of the unicorns. He maketh them also to leap like a calf, Lebanon also, and Shirion like a young unicorn. But thou shalt exalt mine horn like the unicorns, and I shall be anointed with fresh oil. What? Unicorns? Really? Surely that's just some ancient mistranslation in the Bible. Well, I guess that's a question, isn't it? Should the Hebrew word re'em be translated unicorn or wild ox? Well, there seems to be no definite answer. From what I could tell, it really just depends on the context, though in my opinion the argument that could be made for the translation as unicorn is more solid than that of wild ox. That being said, let's examine some verses and draw some conclusions. Now I'll say this much. 5 of the 6 verses that mention wild ox or unicorn make sense either way, though, as a side note, there are actually 9 references to unicorn in the KJV and only 6 mentions of wild ox in the NKJV. I would also like to clarify that I don't fully believe in unicorns at one time or another. I just simply find this very interesting. The following verses cause me to lean in the direction of unicorns. I'll read the following passage from the ESV, but put unicorn in place of wild ox on the screen. Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Can you bind him in the furrows with ropes? Or will he harrow the valleys after you? Will you depend on him because his strength is great? And will you leave to him your labor? Do you have faith in him that he will return your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? Here's the deal. We have tamed the wild ox. He does harrow our fields and sleep by our manger. In my opinion, this can't be a wild ox, but that's just my opinion. Please don't take my words without open-minded investigation of your own, and search deeper into this topic, as I have only a small portion of the facts available.